I will start my video by speaking about the UN seated briefing on protecting soft targets versus terrorist attacks. So in order to kick off the civil year 2021, this is a very important topic of counterterrorism. Two focuses here: United Nations Security Council resolutions, both of 2017, 2396 and 2341, to get a better understanding in the matter. I would summarize the situation when we speak about protecting soft targets against terrorist attacks on four key aspects: recovery, response, mitigation, and investigation. Alright, so I'm gonna start speaking about the report of the seated in this matter, in this briefing, to invoke that suicide bombers, active shooters, explosions are some of the continuous threats to soft targets in general populations. The work with the UNICT and Interpol from the UN seated perspective in this matter is to get also a better assessment. Also, if we analyze the United Nations Security Council Resolution 2396, it has to take in consideration identifying the gaps, threats, improving processes for national and regional contexts, and encouraging states to develop processes and work also with communities and civil society to counter evolving threats. I will get back later on this video by speaking about the efforts of multilateral counterterrorism in order to help foster the response from national levels of member states, by also invoking Chapter 7 of the United Nations Security Council. So also an important thing here is to have a focus on implementation, especially at the national level, as I invoked. If I want to go more technical about the UN seated synthesis in this matter, it's very important to say that soft targets are defined differently depending on each state. In general, it sums the accessible points for terrorist acts, such as terrorist sites, cultural and religious monuments, as well as sports venues. I'll come back later to speak about counterterrorism and sports. The challenges here are that these targets are numerous, and there is a need of a better understanding of threats vis-a-vis for these soft targets. And there is a need of a risk assessment that will lead to states creating national soft target processes. Also, from a disaster management risk processes, it exists at a national level due to an absence of a viable information sharing process at several levels of governments in each state, which means you can have very valuable information at the national level, but when you get to the bottom to analyze better the situations in regions, districts, it's very hard to get through in that matter. The importance of identification before the threat materializes is also something that is important to notice, and there must be a better coordination with the GCTF in this context of action as well. Also, the UNCTAD have invoked some work that has been done with Japan and some African countries in this context of action from a technical perspective. Aviation is linked to this context as a soft target protection of airports and terminals. There has been another briefing that spoke about the task of counterterrorism in aviation at the end of 2020, and it is very related and connected with this topic of soft targets. The principles 50 and 51 related to protecting touristic cultural sites when it comes to foreign terrorist fighters are also important to sum up in this briefing. There is also work on explosive analysis and communication technologies that must be better developed. And finally, the work in the context of COVID-19 requires a better monitoring and security analysis. From the perspective of the UNOCT, we can also mention here the soft targets attacks that are on the top of the agenda of the UNOCT, and that there is work with UN seated, but also with the UN Alliance for Civilizations and the GCTF. From the matter of guidance and examples, there is a menu of tools to keep basically the local authority protecting soft targets, example the touristic sites, and also a requirement of a more public and private work and effort from the civil society actors. The mentoring services are also from the matters of the UNICT when it comes to this context of action. In example, experts helping any member state in technical and protocol. There is a focus on major sports events. Like I said, I'm going to speak furthermore about this topic, also related to the special circumstance of the COVID-19 and how the major sports events are going to cope within the future, depending on the present situation that we have now in early 2021. There's a focus on an addendum of good practice and list of tools by UNOCT, which leads also to develop the expertise. That's an important point, and the work with member states on an established methodology, especially on the legal aspects. Providing training to the member state regarding the specific threats is also among the actions that are intended to be done by the UNOCT within this framework. I want to speak about at a glance, about the Interpol also in this matter of counterterrorism. The Interpol see the issues of soft targets as a cross-cutting one in terms of protection. Who carries those attacks? What weapons? From where? These are so many questions that are put into the table. And in this matter, I would think that the mitigation is very important to have a better understanding. Based on mitigation process, understanding how to protect, the Interpol can work on critical infrastructure and soft targets with the seated, in example, in a matter of intelligence sharing. Sustaining a culture of security starts with law enforcement from vigilance point as well. And there is an approach of multilateralism that must move also to a local approach, mitigation with member states for a better understanding of potential problems and then move into problem solving. The Interpol assesses that there is also a problem of a lack of common definition of soft targets. It's a prerogative for each member state in this matter in order to get to a real multilateral definition of soft target, which could take time. The Interpol also emphasized on the fact that these threats could be also indirectly be related to nuclear and explosion matters. So this is at a glance the points of international bodies and organizations. Also, there is an example from a national perspective that has been invoked in the briefing. It's the one of Tunisia. So in Tunisia, the government having challenges with the terrorist attacks in attempts to harm activities such as tourism during the last decade. The National Counterterrorism Commission was created therein, abiding by the prerogatives of the United Nations Security Council Resolution 1373 and working for regional and international cooperation within the framework of the United Nations Security Council Resolution 2396 as well, in an effort in terms of security with civil society to create inclusive environments in Tunisia in order to decrease the counterterrorism aspect. A very important topic that will have follow-up with several other meetings during the year. So like I said, the sports venues are part of the soft targets, and in this matter I want also to get back to the importance of how to cope with the circumstance for sports events right now, especially after the pandemic. So there are really two threats for big major sports, and the first one of course is COVID-19, the pandemic, and it is also related to the counterterrorism issue. So there's several big events that are gonna occur within the next months, in years. I do mention the 2020 Olympics in italic in 2021, the 2022 Winter Olympics, the 2022 FIFA World Cup, and the 2020 UEFA European Championship in italics in 2021. So here is the point here. There is a perspective of work regarding the issues of COVID-19 that has been seen in several events during the year 2020, and there is a certain protocol to follow up for this sports manifestation to be done within the circumstance. And we see now some few examples, not just for international games, but also for international competition that take a while in certain countries, such as we have seen with the US Open in last fall, and ever since the beginning of the year. We know that it's the IHF Handball World Championship took place in Egypt with the 32 teams, a month competition. There's also an African Championship of Soccer in Cameroon that is taking place. There are also the finals that will be coming furthermore that I have been speaking about here. There's also the Australian Open that will work under the restrictions of the COVID-19 and will take place 3 weeks after its delivery dates, if you want. For the FIFA World Cup 2022, we have already spoken about the efforts of counterterrorism and the work of other member states in order to help Qatar in this context of action. I do speak here about the efforts of the Kingdom of Morocco for the counterterrorism task that must be conducted during the events. Even if there are no supporters, like I said, due to the COVID-19, we don't know, because we saw the FIFA Club World Cup in Qatar today with few supporters. The focus of counterterrorism must be ongoing in this context of action, and therefore applying it also to the following FIFA World Cup in the United States, Canada, and Mexico in 2026. So very important points. And regarding the facts of playing the UEFA Euro for matter security reason of COVID-19, the 2020 Euro in England instead of playing in the 12th country, I don't see what's going to be different when you see that the UEFA Champions League games and the UEFA Europa League games will see teams going from an airport to the other all across Europe, from the last 16 in the Champions League to the final, from the last 32 in the Europa League till the final. And this could apply to the Euro as well, even if it is organized by UEFA in 12 countries. So this was a small also summary of sports, because I'm also a big fan of sports. I won't come back here to speak about the second topic in this matter. Not very far from counterterrorism, but could be an indirect reason for several counterterrorism involvements. It's related to countering global kleptocracy. And here, when we speak about kleptocracy, we speak about illicit finance, transnational corruption, and it applies to autocracy regimes, in example, where it's used to decimate democratic processes. There is a need of a global set of initiatives in this context of action, in example, from the diplomatic standpoint, in order to work to counter kleptocracy in oligarchic states where military confrontation is perceived as foreclosed. In example, in some cases in China and Russia right now. The situation of Ukraine is a good example when speaking about effort to eliminate kleptocracy, but the process has slowed down the issue due to the pressure by oligarchs to Ukrainian institutions. The efforts must be done at the level of the IMF and the European Union as well, in order to create a real multinational countering global kleptocracy task. There is a focus on the nexus of terrorism and corruption that is also ongoing in this matter of issue. And 32 countries during the last year led major anti-corruption protests regarding the state of the world with the COVID-19 pandemic that has, of course, put oil on the fire in several contexts of action. The corruption in governance and bureaucracy, in terms of analyzing it and analyzing also the intelligence and the economic perspective, is a part of this in order to coordinate a global strategy with the current pandemic responses by creating a logistic system for governance, not just at the community level. And this not applying for the circumstance of the COVID-19, but it has also to be an ongoing task within the long-term future. Country level strategies, main question here, why corruption is happening, digging into the root cause. In example, poor procurement system leading as a consequence to bribery. The work could be helped within bilateral agendas, former ambassadors, in order to have a better analysis. The threat to the security, for example, of member states here is very imminent. I will take the example of the United States with the US security that is basically been dealing with weaponized corruption while trying to help other countries in this matter, especially when we speak about the task of the United States in Russia, Africa, and Central America. It's the time for the United States to have a better strategy in this matter of countering global kleptocracy in order to help a multilateral policy. Many millions and billions and trillions of dollars have been spent in war expenses these last years. In Syria, 15.3 billion. In Afghanistan, 975 billion. In Iraq, 1.7 trillion. In the Middle East and Asia, 5.9 trillion. So it is very important here to retarget the budget in order to help also with this issue of kleptocracy that is linked, as I said earlier, to security matters, to counterterrorism, and to bettering governance and bureaucracy. The need of a risk assessment to get a serious mitigation strategy at a high level. In example, the US aid to the work of the UN in many regions of the world is also very critical. Critical as well is 2021, a year for a global kleptocracy initiative. Let's remind that the G7 will take place in the UK, and also the UK has an imminent role to play when you speak about countering global kleptocracy. So, among also the other topics that have been very important here during the beginning of the year, the civil year 2021, and during the month of January, is the celebration of the Holocaust. As I say, it's a very important topic for this part of the year, and the Holocaust Memorial was taking place at the level of the United Nations, virtually, of course, due to the war circumstance. So from the UN perspective, the COVID-19 that cost already 2 million lives is just basically making this feeling of hate getting worse and worse. We have noticed an increase of anti-Semitism in several parts of the world. Neo-Nazism is raised as well as in the context of social turmoil that is created by the COVID-19 pandemic. We celebrated the 76th commemoration of the liberation of Auschwitz-Birkenau in special conditions with the pandemic. Thinking of the Jewish people, also the Roma and the Sinti, as well as all those who have suffered from the Holocaust and the genocide during the Second World War. The UN strategy on hate speech stands on the fact that there is no vaccine for anti-Semitism and xenophobia. The German Chancellor Angela Merkel also has invoked the part that the January 27, 1945 is an important date in the history of Germany with the liberation of the camps of Auschwitz-Birkenau. Germany stands with all the victims that were basically involved in these atrocious events and stand versus anti-Semitism in Europe and in the world. There is also the most important thing to remind here that the transnational repression is on the rise across the world. It could be related to the other topics that I have already invoked regarding counterterrorism and kleptocracy as well. So this is a very important moment in order also to stand regarding this kind of matters and follow up with the memory, because we cannot forget what happened during the past century regarding these issues. Regarding the next steps of the United Nations for this upcoming future, we can come back to the fact that COVID-19 is a first important topic with the distribution of vaccines for original virus of COVID-19. Right now there is an unequal distribution, a possible emancipation of other new variants as we see. The global pandemic needs to have a global vaccination campaign, and this is one of the first points that has been invoked by the United Nations Secretary General while speaking about the priorities of the United Nations in the near future. Climate change is also part of this, the crisis, with a vision of 2050 through a decisive action that must continue evolving right now. Financial support to global economy is the third point, and it is related also to so many aspects, a problem that is tracing to the pre-COVID world in terms of development. We must call it now the pre-COVID world, and I will come back later to speak about this matter. Non-proliferation and disarmament is one of the objectives of the EU, and when it comes also to my field, when we speak here about the progress that has to be made via enhanced international cooperation, especially regarding nuclear weapons. The problem of Libya could be also seen as developing, even with following the non-respect of the United Nations Security Council resolutions, and neither the non-respect of the own commitments by the Libyan counterparts in this matter in 2020. The progress has been made, and now the effort must go through getting foreign troops and mercenaries out of the country gradually in order to move towards a peacekeeping process. In terms of conflict resolution and protection, we must remind that there is an anniversary event about Syria on March the 15th. And here also there is an advice from the United Nations to look at the issue and how the Libyans have dealt with their problem, and have in Syria a process in order to get into ceasefire that is more or less holding right now. It stands still because we have areas with Turkish domination, areas with the US, and an area with the Assad regime and Russia, and this is how the country is very much divided. And it should look, like I said, at the Libyan problem and discuss the future in terms of a better viability when it comes to elections and the constitutional framework. For now, we can say that really it's still a status quo in Syria. The nuclear agreement with Iran is also an important point here, and the JCPOA has been a major diplomatic asset according to the UN despite the obstacles that have been encountered. It's essential to turn things towards a peace building process that will benefit the whole Middle East in this situation. That will lead us to speak about Israel and Palestine, and that the initiatives of the UN in order to establish a peace process are ongoing according to the reports from the United Nations, with the fact that there must be a two-state solution and that election in both countries should contribute to this context of action. Now, the UN also emphasized on the relationship between the United States and China while speaking about the Chinese authoritarian agenda. The United Nations Secretary General said that he wants to see a reset in different dimensions between the two countries, and to work on climate action together, as well as on trade, technology, justice, and international cooperation to benefit the whole world. Let's remind also the situation of Cyprus. That is also one of the important when it comes to the Security Council this year. Just to remind that in early March there is the meeting 5+1 that will be related to this area that is very critical. The UN in a potential post-COVID, what is sure is that nothing will be like before, even if we see a progressive positive development throughout the summer, but that's based of course on the pace of the vaccine and how these variants are developing right now. There is a level of uncertainty, that's for sure. it's hard to foresee. And there is, of course, like I said earlier, a concern about vaccinations in the southern hemisphere of the globe. It's difficult to have a normal UNGA for sure in September, and that's gonna be probably online, such as many other events of international organization. The FIFA will have also its second Congress virtually next May. So I wanna come back to what I said earlier in the video regarding Chapter 7 of the United Nations Security Council and the focus on peace enforcing in this matter. That is not peacekeeping. For example, in the deal with terrorist threats in the G5 Sahel, the Lake Chad countries, Cameroon, Niger, Chad, and Nigeria, as well as in the Somalian issue, the African forces must act within a strong mandate to help their countries get better based on the Chapter 7.